Hey everyone, welcome back to another Halo Wars 2 guide video. For today I wanted to talk about super turtling, and if you're a regular viewer on the channel, you'll know that I love to super turtle in Halo Wars games. I find that to be hilarious, and it's really the most fun strategy I like to do in the game. However, I've noticed that a lot of people have asked the question, well, what happens if you get turtled, or what happens if I get turtled? What is the strategy on how to break a super turtle? What do you do in the situation when your opponent is super turtling and you can't seem to win? And this happens quite a lot on Sentry and Badlands. Those two maps are pretty good for turtling. So I have some general tips that I've gone through to kind of break super turtling matches, and hopefully this will be helpful to you. If you want to see any other Halo Wars 2 guides on my YouTube channel, there is a playlist, so be sure to check that out. But let's get started with what happens when you get super turtled. So the easiest solution I can tell you is just don't let them turtle you. And that's easier said than done on maps like Sentry and Badlands. To get a super turtle set up, you most likely need to be in at least Tech 2, and you need to have probably turrets built. You need to have a handful of pretty decent units, whether that'll be tanks or maybe even a super unit or something. Siege, I think, is a good idea when you're super turtling. All of these things add up to where it takes a little bit of time to get a super turtle set up. I would say at least 10 to 15 minutes would be how long it would take to get a good turtle set up. So I would say if one of your opponent joins or starts a match, goes into a match thinking, I'm going to turtle, it's probably going to take them at least that amount of time. So if you can't end the match before that, it's totally understandable, because I like to extend my matches as long as possible. So I really don't care if it goes longer than 15 minutes. What do you do once your opponent's turtle is set up? Well, most likely you won't have to worry about them attacking you, because that's almost going to invalidate their entire turtle setup. They can't turtle alone on just turrets and siege. They're going to have to make units as well. Most likely it's going to be anti-air and like heavy vehicles. So I would probably say like tanks and Wolverines or Wraiths and Reavers, that sort of a thing. The easiest way to break a turtle is by going air. So if your opponent is really setting up a turtle, they're going to make a lot of anti-air, which means they won't have enough firepower to attack you. So you're going to have some time to kind of coordinate a strategy. So I would say fully upgrade the units that you want to use, your bases, make sure you have all of your base slots used, and make sure you have your supply buildings fully upgraded. You want to make sure that your economy is going to be going at full force. And you may actually want to have a few more production buildings than you normally do. So maybe if you have one air pad or something, you should have like 2 or 3. And I'll get to the reason why you want to have more production buildings in a minute. But you want to coordinate an attack. You probably won't be winning the game in one single attack. Sometimes in Halo Wars matches, you can win by just going straight to your opponent's main base, and your opponent can kind of implode when you get all of their units at their training, and then you take up their main base. Their expo isn't fully developed yet, so sometimes they just quit or they resign or whatever the case may be. That's not going to happen in a super turtle match usually. The reason being is your opponent's going to have a lot of resources. They're going to have their bases fully developed. They're going to have their population most likely fully built, so they're going to have a lot of units. So by and large, you're not going to win in one attack. So you really have 2 options. The first option is to take over the map one base and one power node at a time. Eventually, your opponent will be left to 1 or 2 bases, and this happens almost all the time on Sentry and Badlands. It's very difficult when you're going to Sentry, when you want a turtle, to protect those bases outside those first 2 tiers, the way that Sentry is set up. It's really hard to defend those corner bases, that mini base at the top, even the power nodes outside that first one on Sentry. And Badlands is kind of set up the same way as well. It's pretty difficult to defend those top corner bases on Badlands. So you're going to have an opportunity to take over the map one base and one power node at a time. So either your opponent is going to let you do that because they don't want their turtle to the way they have their units set up and everything, they don't want to move everything and go and attack you, because if they do, they're going to be vulnerable for you to go for their main base. The second option is to go on an all-out assault that really never ends. This usually ends up with you going air using all of your unit drops. So if you're Cutter, you're going to have like the ODST assault group, the ODST drop, the Cyclops drop, so on and so forth. And or making heavy tier units, high tier units like tanks or wraiths or grizzlies, or super units. Actually, the Scarab works really good for this. The goal of the second option is not to destroy actually all of your opponent's bases. Well, it kind of is, but it's more of a secondary goal. But your primary goal, if you go option 2, is to bankrupt your opponent, essentially. So the reason why this kind of plays out this way, if you are going to try to break their turtle, they're going to have fewer bases than you. You're going to eventually be able to break through and take over a few power nodes, a few bases, maybe on the end. And if you turn those into supply buildings, you're going to be making more supplies and more power than your opponent. Therefore, if you're going to go on an all-out assault that never ends, if you're destroying more units than your opponent is destroying units of yours, you're going to have the upper hand when it comes to the economy. And if you start out with a decent economy, when you go on your first assault, maybe you want to save up and be floating like 5,000 supplies and a few thousand power, something like that. You're going to have enough supplies and power to replenish your army as it's being destroyed. And if your opponent has fewer economic buildings, they're going to be able to do that too, but not as long. So a prime example of this is when Ed and I did our, I want to say it was our 3.5 hour turtle game. We were turtling for, I don't know, 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes. We were turtling for a long time, and we ended up having like 75,000 supplies and power, just an absolute ridiculous amount of supplies. And our opponents were really attacking us almost nonstop, but they were never successful, and most of our units survived. So we were actually winning the economy battle that way. However, when we turned our focus to be offensive and try to break their turtle, they weren't able to keep up with us because we had so many supplies. Our assault did not stop for like 30 or 45 minutes. I mean, it was like we were pumping out scarabs left, right, and center. We would have them training on 3 different war councils. So we had always a scarab training. And when a scarab died, another one showed up. When it died, another one showed up. And we kind of just did this over and over and over for 30 or 45 minutes, and they just ended up being bankrupt. They couldn't afford to make any units to stop us, and that's how we won that turtle. You could also, if you're facing against UNSC, this is kind of a lame shortcut, but you could just make a lot of vultures. And if you're playing as someone like Forge, you can do a combat salvage, and you fly all your vultures over there, and you try and do all your Y ability. And if your opponent brings a bunch of Wolverines, then you can drop your offensive powers on the Wolverines, like your Scatter Bomb or your Eradication or your Beam or whatever the case may be. They'll probably destroy all your Vultures, but if you're using Combat Salvage, you get all your Vultures back, and so you fly over a second time, and usually that second time is when you'll do the trick. That's kind of a shortcut playing against UNSC. UNSC is not very good when it comes to turtling for that very reason. But by and large, those 2 options plus the Vulture shortcut should end up breaking a turtle. And if you don't break the turtle in your first few attacks, there's no need to panic. Just make sure you're coordinating if you're playing in Team War or in twos or whatever the case may be with your teammate. Usually, if you attack together, sometimes that works. If it doesn't, then maybe you attack different bases, or you can go to the all-out assault where you attack, and when you lose all of your units, your ally attacks. When you lose all of their units, you should have yours building. And that's kind of where all of the multiple production buildings come in. If you have like 3 or 4 air pads, you can be training 4 or 5 Hornets at a time. And, you'll get your pop up very, very quickly. And that'll usually end up being a little bit more than what your opponent can handle. Because if they're not training Wolverines and Marines out of 3 or 4 garages or vehicle depots, whatever the case may be, you'll probably end up taking out their anti-air with your air just because you have the numbers. And Halo Wars 2 is a numbers game. Finally, avoid your lower tier units. You don't want to be making Marines unless, if you're on, if you're kind of broke. You shouldn't attack if you're broke to begin with, but if you really want to, you can make some Marines to take out air. I really don't think Marines are a good idea. So I would avoid Marines. I would avoid Jackrabbits. I would avoid Warthogs. Really any Tech 2 unit besides air I would completely avoid. And I would go very heavy. So tanks, Grizzlies. I'm not sure if a Condor would be best to break a turtle. It kind of can work due to their range. I find more success with the Scarab personally. But super units I think is a good move too. Because if you have a really good economy, they're by and large are actually kind of cheap. 2K each if you're floating 10,000 supplies and power. That's not a whole lot. By the time you build this Scarab and send it over there and it dies, you're going to have enough supplies and power to make another one. So hopefully these tips help you to break a turtle. This is really strategies I've learned, I guess, over the years, breaking turtles and turtling myself. And I find it just so much fun to super turtle. I don't know why, but it's a blast. If you want to see us turtling for an absurd amount of time, there is a playlist on our YouTube channel, the Super Turtle series. We have games lasting over 4 hours, by the way, if you want to spend an entire afternoon watching one Halo Wars game. It is there for you if you so choose to do so. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you learned something from this. If you have a different strategy on breaking a super turtle that I didn't describe here in this video, post it in the comments down below. It could be helpful to someone who's wanting to try some different strategies. And if you're new to Team Respawn in the Halo Wars community and you want to be chatting with players in Halo Wars all the time, we have a Discord server, over 2,500 people in that server. You should join it. Link to that is in the description on YouTube. All right, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you, James.